Ah yes, here we have it. Darth Vader vs Obito Uchiha. Well, there's a lot to talk about, so let's not have too big a preamble. Actually no, let's exactly have a preamble. You can skip to here if you just want to hear me talk about the episode. Because there's a lot to say before even getting into the episode itself and what I think about it. Let's begin with this. Can y'all motherfuckers not have one normal waiting period when it isn't Marvel vs DC or two characters apparently nobody knows? Stitch vs Rocket was bad, and I thought Vader vs Obito would just be miserable for me. But we've now reached a point where no Vader vs Obito is just all around miserable to wait for generally. Aside from having an absolute blast recording the prediction for it, something that was really needed for me because my god was the week miserable before that, the whole waiting period just sucked. For me, let's start with just the anecdotal thing. I could not escape the badgering over Vader vs Arturia. If you want my updated stance, I fucking despise this matchup, and not because of anything with the matchup itself, but because nobody can apparently respect anyone's opinion on anything. And no, I still don't like Arturia vs Luke. They have a shiny sword, I guess. What a lame fucking matchup. Just nothing I like about Arturia or Luke in it. Vader vs Arturia is just a huge reason why I don't want Fate and Deathbell anymore though, because a huge amount of people will just badger me over my opinion and views on whatever chosen matchups. Usually people who have no idea about anything to do with Fate. Either I'm getting badgered for it, or I'm telling people why the matchup is thematically kind of weak and getting badgered back for it, no matter what the matchup is. Because apparently, I'm the only person who realizes that making a Fate matchup around the theme of someone from the past brought back to life to be a familiar applies to over 300 characters within the franchise history. It'd be like making a Batman matchup where the main theme is guy in a super team. But beyond that, more people were getting hit with the extremely biased and one-sided viewpoint the general community had. For the most part, Obito and his fans were just being bombarded with arrogant, I'm better than you rhetoric from the side that supported Vader. And I don't just mean the kind of normal, well, Vader stomps and your arguments are wrong, but I saw people just talking shit about Obito as a character to no end, mocking his fans, and mocking their thought that the matchup could be close at all. Generally, a lot of Vader's fans were just making huge asses of themselves. The incredibly snobbish and arrogant attitude taken by a large chunk of Vader's followers was just unnecessary and pointlessly spiteful and childish. And no, I'm not targeting everyone on that. Absolutely, there were a large amount of people on Vader's side who weren't acting like that, or even like me, where they were making jabs at Obito, but they were kind of playful and just, you know, not serious. But there was an even bigger group of people who were taking swings that were more serious and actively antagonizing people, and that was painful to see. And our last bit of preamble before the episode, the winner. Look, let me just say right now, I personally, with my level of knowledge, which is not the most expert on this matchup, I'm of the opinion that the episode is incorrect. I am personally of the opinion that Vader should have won. However, this will not cloud my view on the episode, and I'm not arrogant enough to think that I'm an expert completely who knows all the details. It's really not a big deal for me that the guy I thought should win lost, especially considering that I thought Obito would win the episode anyway, but there are a few reasons. As I've said before, versus debating is highly subjective. I got a lot of criticism for saying this, but you need to have your head so far up your ass that it's looped back through your body and popped back onto your neck to really think your views on versus is objective. When talking about an outside viewer's interpretation of events within a fictional story, their standards for what is or isn't context that would invalidate or validate scaling, what feats they accept or consider outliers or downplay, their interpretations of certain complex lore elements and what things might mean for scaling or interactions with other series, or even just the pseudo-scientific nature of versus calculations done by, no offense intended at all, amateurs who do not have the level of scientific and physics knowledge to make truly accurate determinations of the level of impact certain feats would have, there's no way to call it objective if you actually have any idea of what an opinion is or what that word means. If you think versus debating is an objective thing, I hate to say it, but you're probably an idiot, because you're saying that, objectively, each character is absolutely a set level of power, and that your views is correct, which is arrogant and just false. 2. This matchup is genuinely so close that I think either side is fair game, and that arguments on both sides are very strong, so it's not an issue with me that they go with the interpretations that bring Obito ahead. I do not disagree that Obito could win, I think it's so close. And 3, it's not important anyway. Who wins basically never clouds my judgment of an episode because that's all their opinion, and I'm more interested in how they convey the outcome, how they go about analyzing characters in entertaining ways, and of course how the fight is done. Speaking of which, let's talk about the episode itself at last. Starting with Vader's analysis, I really like how Anakin's side was tackled. Instead of glossing over it or taking too long, it felt just right. They start with Vader and then go backwards to Anakin, which feels right. I mean, that's how the films went. They talk about his upbringing, his backstory, they don't waste time pointlessly shitting on the prequels again, and they build up at a good pace to when he becomes Vader. They then use Star Wars Detours footage, which is based even if it's not the scene. I'm not a huge fan of how much they shit on his suit in this cutaway. Aside from the hilarious A-tier choices of footage on the screen on the back, this feels like it could have been done better. In fact, I actually like how the last Vader episode did it better. In Vader vs. Doom, they talk about what made the suit so effective and then go into its faults. Instead of talking about them like a joke, the episode felt more like it portrayed those flaws as horrific issues with the suit that really tormented and agonized Vader. It felt more like a serious issue that really fucked with Vader and played up how demented Palpatine was, as opposed to this episode where it just comes off like they're cracking jokes and mocking him. Hell, they don't even bring up what it does correctly in this episode, because the suit does have its advantages too. I'm also not super huge in how the Versus part where they randomly pause to talk about his speed was handled. They go from what the Force can do, to suddenly bring up this one speed feat, to back to the Force and his durability. It could have gone better if they, say, brought up the ability of Force speed, and then said even without it he was this fast, or later when they bring up the assassin droid, they could follow it on with, and another droid named blah blah blah, to lead into it. I think that would have just flowed better from like one point to the next. Also, when it comes to actually bring up Force powers, there's plenty on the sidebars as usual, but what's actually mentioned by name is pretty light. In fact, the same amount are brought up in this episode as Versus Doom when it comes to being verbally mentioned. With some margin for error, I may have missed one or two things that were mentioned in these episodes when I went back to count. And it's fine, it's not a huge deal, but I did notice it and it felt like they really didn't go too in depth into the true extent of Vader's abilities, at least compared to Obito, who had almost twice the amount of stuff brought up that he could actually do. And no, if you're wondering, this is not because Vader has a limited kit, this is just because they decided not to bring it up. And kinda like last time, I think the inclusion of the end of Vader's story was a bit sudden compared to how they normally do this in their analyses. It's just like, oh, and then at the end, because of his son, he did this one cool thing and that's it, good night, he saved someone he loved. Which sure, you could argue is kind of like what's in the film if you don't pay attention to any of the narrative building up to it in Revenge of the Sith, Return of the Jedi, but it is kind of weird. Obito's analysis though, similarly, does a good job going over Obito's backstory. It doesn't feel like it takes too long or that it rushes too fast. It goes over what's important pretty well and leads into the stuff people really care about at a good pace. Then there's the cutaway, which sure did happen. It's not painfully distracting at all, just kind of whatever. But while that wasn't funny, I do find Boomstick bringing up the hypocritical nature of this plan and then answering his own rhetorical question by just completely ignoring it to be pretty amusing. That got a chuckle out of me. I think Obito's analysis overall was significantly better than Vader's. It went over all of his abilities well and did a good job of bringing up narrative elements, what those elements lead to for Versus, the new powers and abilities he got from those elements, how that furthered his goal, and how that led into the next narrative element of his story, and the next form he got. Which I understand, because of the forms that Obito has and how they play into the story, makes for a much easier template to use when discussing a character than Vader just having Anakin and then Darth Vader as his two states. But Death Battle has made banger analyses even better than Obito's for characters who don't have forms at all, like Magneto. So it's not like I'm asking for something unreasonable here. Truthfully though, Obito could very well have my favorite analysis so far in the season. I think only like Chosen Undead could reasonably stand on the same level to me. It does so much to not only go into his story, but also his motivations and how he develops, how he changes with time to see things differently and how that leads into his narrative. It's enough that when it finally comes to bringing up his ending, it doesn't feel sudden like Vader, but rather like this is the natural point it was all coming to. Because this analysis makes sure you understand Obito's character and motivation. You can see why he would change with how they word it. It makes up for an almost flawless summation of Obito's story, his character, his arc, his abilities, his versus scaling, and his many forms. The only thing that didn't really get mentioned was Izanagi, which I'm okay with, because I wouldn't want that in there if it ended up compromising the frankly outstanding pacing of this analysis. Well, I guess if we got that over the cutaway gag, but even this cutaway gag has Wiz mostly just talking about Kamui and contributing something to the analysis beyond the joke by definition only. Again, not to say Vader's analysis was bad, but I feel like it suffered from not doing a lot versus-wise, but also not doing a lot story-wise at the end. I think the main reason for this might just be because they had to spend more time on the Anakin stuff, while Obito's stint as pre-shenanigans Obito had less to cover, so more thought could be put into the end. But it's also that throughout Obito's analysis, they definitely dotted things throughout that subtly built up to the climax. Vader's just didn't have that, even if I think I understand why. Now I'm led to believe that this episode is the writing debut of, I want to say it's pronounced Djangor, like Django with an R at the end, but I don't actually know. But if this is the writing debut, which I'm pretty sure it is, what a debut. Like, this is a hell of a good analysis. Obito has undoubtedly one of my favorite analyses in the last few years of Death Battle, and Vader's, while having more flaws, still was a pretty solid analysis. The only writing debut I think matches and surpasses this one is the other DJs with Magneto vs Tetsuo, which, if you'll recall, had one of my favorite analysis portions of all time. So I can safely say, what a fantastic job. If the writer happens to be watching this, you did amazingly, but you're probably not watching this, so... funny word. Panini, then comes the fight, and actually no, again, we have to bring up, go ahead, Brandon Yates sponsorship, go check out Brandon's channel, subscribe to him absolutely, he's a fucking legend and a great guy, but don't listen to what Death Battle's say and only check out his Versus stuff. Again, go check out his original music because it bangs as well. I say that, his original non-Versus music, all of his music is original, aside from covers, but he prefaces them with this is a cover. Once more, my personal recommendations for his non-Versus tracks are Home is Where the Hurt Is and Situational Design, because they're my favorites, and hopefully I'll remember to link them in the description. Also ERB footage based. Anyway, the fight. Starting off, the fight looks really nice, with some issues. Vader's model, I want to say, is taken from either Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, or Star Wars Battlefront 2, while I think Obito's models are just taken from Storm 4. While they look pretty good, I feel like there is something of an issue in terms of how they look together. It's not super distracting at all. In fact, it's not really distracting in any regard, but it is slightly noticeable. And I feel like, unironically for once, Vader's Fortnite model actually would have looked better for this because it has less realistic detail and that would match Obito better. It's not a huge deal, but I think once you do notice it, it is a little bit noticeable and it is a little bit distracting, but it's definitely not a big criticism at all. Don't think it is. The area looks great too. I think choosing a sandy beach is both really funny given this is Vader, but also fairly cool because just generally, it has the right sort of vibe, I guess, to say. It obviously taking place at night was perfect, both to drop Infinite Tsukuyomi at the end, and so that Vader's glowing lightsaber and Obito's bright fire had more of a cinematic look to them, illuminating what was around. The voice acting for both characters also felt really good. Jason Manoka, I'm gonna say, returned for the first time since Season 6's Ghost Rider vs. Lobo to reprise his role as Vader from DBX's Darth Vader vs. Magneto. And that's fucking cool! It's so awesome they brought him back, and also hey, his birthday is March 9th apparently, which is right near my birthday, that's fucking awesome. He does a fantastic job in the role, just like last time, pulling off Vader's deep, booming voice in a very convincing fashion, and sounding just as intimidating as he should. Vader's references to lines within his series also come off way better than his previous opponent Doom's attempts to do the same in Lex vs. Doom. Instead of sounding like watered down versions of those lines, this time it really sounds like Vader saying them with the same inflection and impact, but it also doesn't come off like Vegeta, where they're leaning on "I understood that line" energy to carry his characterization. Rather, it feels like it all fits nicely and doesn't feel intrusive, and he has plenty of lines that feel original. NAL comes back again after his breakthrough at Season 9 in the voice of another Uchiha. First he voiced Madara, now he's voicing Madara's Echo Fighter. And he does a very good job as well, sounding pretty damn cool and boasting a fairly intimidating voice, without sounding as intimidating as Vader, but also not like he's a gimp in comparison. Also, he gets to continue his win streak, which nobody would have believed he'd ever had if you told them at the start of Season 7. Now talking about the fight, there's really two halves, and that's because this is honestly a pretty long animation by today's standards, going on for nearly 4 minutes. The first half of this fight is Vader versus base Obito, and it's really cool on its own. Vader feels like a juggernaut, and the way he gets around Obito's abilities by quite literally walking through them really fits. Obito only takes the advantage with his brief illusionary moment and when he goes mad and starts attacking wildly, which Vader pretty easily counters right after. I will say though, there are a few modeling issues here. Obito basically makes an Ahegao face when he gets penetrated, which is pretty distracting and really funny, and Padme isn't immediately noticeable because I'm pretty sure this is an unfinished model and it looks kind of ugly. This wasn't a huge problem for me, but it has to be mentioned that a majority of people I've talked to weren't aware that was Padme at first and thought it was actually Rey. But it's a cool usage of Obito's power to make Vader crush his mask and reveal someone that briefly stuns him, even if it ends up looking a bit weird in practice. Vader crushing Obito's Kamui is pretty cool though. I also find the starting stab a little weird. My assumption is that Obito was phasing for this whole thing, so Vader never actually stabbed him. Seeing as Obito has no wound on him, his little headband things are clipping straight through the lightsaber, and Obito seems completely unaffected compared to what happens later. But it's kind of weird that Vader seems to not notice that he made no contact, given lightsabers tend to have some kind of physical reaction to what they hit. It even sparks and makes a sound when it hits him. So did he get hit or not? It's a bit confusing to me. Maybe if this is where Izanagi was used, that would have been better, especially because it would have made everyone think, oh, Vader's absolutely winning. Obito already used Izanagi, and Death Battle tends to only use most characters' powers once per fight. But given Izanagi wasn't in the episode at all, I guess whatever. I do like how instead of all the last lightsaber episodes, Vader's lightsaber here feels like a menace. Luke barely got to use his beyond hitting magic. Boba Fett's was matched not only by Samus's made-up saber, but also her fucking foot. Yoda's was basically a baseball bat against Mickey's Keyblade. And Obi-Wan's was blocked by a fucking knife with some electricity on it. Even Vader's last episode, his lightsaber wasn't up to much. Doom punches it. And in all these cases, aside from maybe Kakashi and that Samus kick, I can understand why it was done this way. But this episode makes it feel like a real threat. He effortlessly destroys Obito's stupid fan, he deflects Obito's attacks easily, and even deflected the TSO somehow with it. Anytime it hits Obito, it feels meaty. Like, yeah, Luke and Obi-Wan also only hit their enemies once with their lightsabers, and both times was an instant kill. But here, Vader isn't matching anything. He's just overpowering Obito's attacks, and it's only when Obito has his TSO staff that he manages to actually keep up. Obito has to actually work to keep up with that thing. And when he's just in base, he literally needs to phase through it to avoid it, which is much cooler than if he just took it or blocked it with some power. Overall, this start where Obito is just throwing his stuff out and Vader is walking through it like he's making his daily commute to the store to buy some fucking gummy worms comes off as really cool for Vader. It does, however, come with one kind of major flaw. Basically, everyone I talked to before the episode came out who had seen the preview, other than one, was of the opinion that absolutely Obito was going to win. Just because Vader was completely dominating him the whole time. And I was of the same opinion. I felt like absolutely Obito was going to win unless he just completely thrashed Vader the moment he went Jubuto, which he didn't. So it does kind of telegraph Vader's win, but I'm not sure how they could have gotten around this, because I don't think making the sequence shorter would have been any good, and this does a good job in conveying that Obito in base has no chance, which is important to bring up. I think this issue isn't really one I can say is with just the episode, but rather Death Battle as a whole and the trends and commonalities between episodes. If other episodes didn't regularly have one character dominate and then they fucking die, I think it wouldn't have felt as obviously telegraphed. One thing I do love about this fight is the way in which characters take battle damage. That's not something we often see very much. In fact, throughout this entire season, the only real battle damage that's happened is the blink and you'll miss it Stitch losing some limbs and back fins and I guess Adam lost his belt. I'm not counting Undead dying, fuck off. But Obito loses his mask, he loses his right eye, he gets impaled, Vader takes a bit of damage to his eye, or at least the eye part of his mask, some damage to his left leg, loses his right hand, and then loses his helmet. Vader takes a lot more damage, which makes him come off as even more unstoppable, because he basically never reacts to it. Even when he loses his hand and lightsaber, he doesn't give a shit. He just keeps on fighting and uses the rest of his resources to keep going. Obito meanwhile is screaming in pain when he gets impaled, which provides a cool contrast as to how Obito is relatively more human still. Now I kind of wish that Jubuto took more damage and that we could see him relying on his regeneration, because that kind of unstoppable force versus regenerating guy dynamic is really cool and I would have wanted to see that, but I'm not losing sleep over it. Jubuto also regrows his eye, which to my knowledge is not only something he's unable to do, but I've heard a researcher said was an animation error, though I don't know where that statement is from or if it's true. This kinda sucks, as they never say he's incapable of regenerating his eye, so most people probably think that this is something that he can do. They never say he's incapable of regenerating his eye, so to most people this kinda makes Vader seem a bit less impressive that he left no lasting damage at all, but it is what it is. I would have liked him to keep the damage, even if that was probably the intention and it was just a mistake in the animation, because it would have made Vader feel a bit more impactful that he took something that important from Obito, his fucking eyeball, where half his powers come from. Though speaking of battle damage, Obito seeing that Vader has lost his humanity by both the fact that he has a metal leg, but also he has a biological face under his helmet and thus is not a robot, is pretty damn cool. And then we get the Ten Tails, and I'm loving this season's trend of letting us have the kaiju shit and giant monsters that past seasons probably wouldn't have given us. Not that I dislike the Ten Tail usage in Mud Aizen, as I think Madara comes off as far better at containing it than Obito by how he immediately contained the Ten Tails while Obito had to take a moment. And I think the context of him summoning the Ten Tails directly in the middle of Aizen's massive fuck-off finishing attack is significantly cooler than Vader just talking and Obito summoning it while he's talking. But the Ten Tails itself gets to fire a tailed beast bomb, which is absolutely awesome. Even Vader's like,
damn bro, that's pretty cool.
Vader stopping the bomb with his bare hands is just awesome for two reasons. One, Vader just catches a giant fucking tailed beast bomb that they explained was insanely powerful and a super nuke by just grabbing it with his palms. No assistance, no weapons, That's insane, and also the way in which he struggles but does contain it helps to show the power of him and the ball being similar. But also, the whole fight prior, Vader was just using one hand at a time. Either he was just using his left hand to smack things around with his lightsaber, except at the start where he's holding it with his right hand before he tosses it, or he's using his right hand to use the Force to toss Obito around. This is the first time he uses both hands together, and it makes it feel so much more impactful. Like, damn, motherfucker has to put some actual effort in now. The music also goes all in at this point. That's No Moon, by the way, sounds great in the fight, but I haven't gotten around to listening to it outside of the battle because it isn't out yet at the time of writing and recording this. The name is God Tier though. It is kind of unintentionally funny that Vader condensing it is like,
I got it, I don't got it.
When it just explodes in his face. He's fine though. The God Tree comes out and we see that Vader used a Force barrier to survive. The Jubito and Vader weapon clash is really cool, with Vader no longer just slowly sauntering up and waiting for Obito to come at him, but now actively jumping in and going on the offensive in a far more aggressive manner. And this shot of Obito flying around the God Tree is fucking awesome to me and has real Ninja Storm vibes. Now, this does have the slight issue that once Jubito comes out, Vader mostly just stands there outside of this one jump, while Obito does things around him. It's a bit cumbersome to me, and that probably could have been done a bit better. But hey, the clash looks cool, and Obito starts doing some real damage. I think here is where I would have liked to see the regen come in. Like, imagine if Vader got to show off his superior skill by slicing off Obito's limbs one at a time during the clash, and that's why Obito flies off into the distance, because while he's flying off, those limbs are regenerating. That would have been wicked. Another kind of unintentionally funny bit is Vader's frame 1 tech to Jubito's attack with a perfect counter, followed by his raw level 3 TIE Advance 1 super for a TOD combo, but sadly he didn't succeed. No, but seriously, the speed at which he spins around to tell his opponent to talk to the hand is really funny. Speaking of hands, I do find it amusing that this time he lost his left one instead of the right one, as I'm sure he's more used to. I would say it's weird that it's all mechanical, but I do not recall if he lost that hand in Revenge of the Sith, or at another point in Canon or Legends he lost his left hand as well as his right one. I just can't recall. I'd much rather ask why the TSO look like metallic Pokeballs instead of jet black spheres. That's a bit awkward looking. Then there's the ending. I know a lot of people love it. Some people hate it. I lean more towards thinking it's fucking awesome. Thematically, using Infinite Tsukuyomi, even if I can imagine has some issues in terms of applying it to the debate and whether Jubito could actually do that, is pretty cool just on its own. I also think it's cool that Vader could have killed Obito right here, presumably, but his own anger clouded him, leading to him pulling him forward just to growl at him first instead, giving Obito time to dump this shit on him. I appreciate too that instead of trying to use a Genjutsu for a fake out, this time they actually used it primarily for this moment of Serenity. Now, I don't like the models in this scene. I mean, Anakin's is fine, just the mascara on him is kind of weird, but Padme's is outright ugly, again, unfinished model. But the idea of Obito letting Anakin have his perfect dream is really nice and heartwarming. He saw himself in Anakin, and decided to give him a piece that Obito himself might never have. Oh, never mind, he just fucking kills him. In my opinion, the killing part makes this into arguably one of the most evil kills in the series, second to Ultron's kill on Sigma, which might never be topped, but we'll see. And no, I'm not counting Thanos's, because just because the ability in the comics is really evil and cruel doesn't mean that the way Death Battle portrayed it was. But the way in which Obito lets Vader have this perfect moment, and then immediately takes it away, makes him come off as such an evil bastard. I know it would have been difficult, but I think they could have had the battle probably end with Infinite Tsukuyomi. Like, find a way to convey that Vader is dead, but Anakin Skywalker is alive within this dream, and in the analysis, make it clear that there is a distinction between them. They even use Anakin and not pre-cyborg Darth Vader in this moment. You can tell because his eyes aren't yellow here the way they would be if he was Vader. Have Obito say something about him being liberated from hell and walking away as Vader collapses on the spot. You can leave it vague as to if Vader is alive but stuck in a dream, or if he died in that moment because Vader is gone and Anakin chose to embrace it, leaving the body something of a soulless, empty husk. Sure, people would have complained if there was no cool, awesome dude bro kill attack, but those people are probably already complaining that Obito got to bust out Infinite Tsukuyomi at all, or that Vader didn't fight it off, so who cares? I mean, fuck, Obito literally tells him to find peace in the next life, and then hits him with the Mr. DNA sword that destroys your fucking soul. What next life? You just obliterated his soul, you gibbon. And it's not like Obito isn't aware of this fact. The afterlife is a thing in Naruto. He's somewhat come back from death in a way. So yeah, I think this kill is cool, but the models are weird, and I think it could have been made a bit more bittersweet instead of purely bitter and a little bit hilarious without anticlimactic the actual impact of the kill is. Like, I gotta admit, it does look pretty cartoony with how the sword just dunks onto a completely motionless Vader, even if it makes sense to be like that. Another option, I guess, would have been you could have had Obito on his way to leave, and then Vader starts fighting back and growling and pushing against Infinite Tsukuyomi, and a shocked Obito is sad to realize he has no choice but to kill Vader, and then hits him before he can really recover. Especially if they found a way to convey that the Anakin side of Vader is trying to stop the anger and stay in the dream, and that it's because of this internal conflict that Vader cannot break free soon enough to stop Obito from killing him. This option, I understand, though, would have required a bit more time and a bit more budget, I'd imagine, so I'm not saying it was needed, or the other variation was needed. Neither are necessary for the death to be good. I think the death is really good as it is, and I don't understand people's issues with the pacing of it, because it should be a slower pace! This scene should be a slower pace. Death Battle finally had a slower paced emotional scene to let the impact really sink in, and people are complaining about the pace of it? Have you not seen a movie before? Or a TV show? Or an anime? Slower pace is not a bad thing sometimes, and it's not a bad thing here. I'm so confused. But hey, I mean, at least Obito got to fulfill his plan, and everyone other than Vader is happy in their dream now. Overall, what a fight. Like, seriously, this fight was incredible. There are definitely problems, and it would be super unfair of me not to point them out, but overall, this is an astounding level of quality. On first watch, I was of the opinion that Chosen Born was still better, but actually sitting down and giving it a more thorough analysis of what it does right and wrong, I think I have to place it higher. While Chosen Born had what I think is the cooler individual shot with this one, and the better music to me, as well as probably some better atmosphere, I think this episode kinda takes the cake on every other front. It begs for a phenomenal fight with great dialogue and overall pretty aesthetic aside from a few models and cum faces, good progression, fantastic voice acting, and only a few things I would have honestly changed. Really, the only main changes I would make is that I would use one of my versions of the ending, and I would have had Vader do more damage to Jubito so Jubito could show off his regeneration. I think it would have maybe just cost too much to implement those along with the rest of the stuff, which I understand. This animation was already pretty lengthy and clearly a lot of passion went into it. Oh, and I think I would have had one last shot of Obito having a sort of like a face looking down at Vader's corpse that conveyed both that he was sad to kill Vader, but also happy to free him from his suffering at the same time. I'm not sure what you would call that face, it's just escaping me right now, but like a bittersweet face. And when I say looking at his corpse, I mean looking at the rubble. There ain't no corpse left, he got TSO'd. The conclusion starts with a fun callback to Kakashi vs Obi-Wan, which is great, but I'm kind of whatever towards the conclusion itself. This might admittedly just be due to knowing most of the details on the matchup beforehand, and noticing that quite a lot was missing, and conclusions generally tend to be pretty short on Death Battle and cut out a lot, which is something that I personally don't like, but that's just a me thing, and I can understand why they would want to keep it more concise. To me though, the fact that they said it was pretty close doesn't scan to me. Just based on the idea of them having similar powers and coming down to who gets a kill first, but the only thing they mention on Vader's side that would end Obito immediately is crushing his organs, while Obito could rip out Vader's soul, Infinite Tsukuyomi him, use TSO, or use Kamui, giving Obito 4 times the amount of win cons by their logic, while Obito could avoid Vader's only win con through intangibility, because they say that he goes to the Kamui dimension, and they say that the Force doesn't exist in Kamui dimension. So, literally, if Obito just goes intangible, Vader cannot do crap to him and his win con doesn't work anymore. So it kinda comes across as the stats were even, but Obito washed with his powers. I'm not even sure if by their logic the organ crush would work, given Jubito can regenerate half his body being obliterated, and they don't say crushing his lungs or anything would stop that. Eye crush could work though, but that's about it. So it doesn't scan to me as super close when they talk about it. It kinda scans like Obito straight up washed when it came to powers. Their similarities like illusions and telekinesis didn't feel like they were enough to call this a close match. This also comes down to how few of Vader's powers were mentioned in the episode. I think putting a few more of his big ones into the analysis, like maybe the death field or how he can vaporize people on the spot, would have worked. Or bring up that though Vader starts on even levels with Obito, his ability to draw on Obito's anger would eventually make him grow stronger over the course of the fight. I think that could have made it feel more even if they brought that up, like Obito may have more instant wins, but Vader having the ability to simply grow too strong for Obito to kill is also a possibility. Or maybe bring up that Vader does have counters to Obito's win conditions, like precognition letting him briefly avoid Kamui, the way they did with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and also the Truth-Seeking Orbs as well with precognition. Or maybe his mental resistance could hold off Infinite Tsukuyomi for a bit. It would have gotten a bit further to make it seem closer, like Vader could hold these off, but he would have to concentrate on them each individually, and eventually there'll be too much for him to concentrate on, and Obito just has so much to throw at Vader that he'd struggle to hold off multiple instant wins at the same time. Maybe bring up that, yeah, Vader could hold off a truth-seeking orb, but he could only hold off a few at a time, and Obito's got a shitload of them. It's not an awful conclusion, but I do feel like it could have been worded a bit better at points. That said, this is a phenomenal episode. Fantastic in basically every sense of the word. The lowest points are a few silly faces, a somewhat underwhelming conclusion, and one side of the analysis not being as mind-blowingly good as the other side. That should say a lot. This is my new favourite episode of the season, and we'll have to see if it can be topped. I'm pretty sure it won't get topped by the next time though, Phoenix vs Raven, a battle I only care about for a blog that I can no longer find. I'm interested in primarily the analysis for this one. Raven's old analysis did a pretty good job of tackling her story from what I'm aware of, but was kinda shit at her power set. It made her honestly seem a bit more like a boring flying brick with some emotion powers, so hopefully they fix that. And Phoenix has a lot of misconceptions about her, and a lot of shit that I think gets overhyped as if they used a ton in Marvel when they're only used once or twice, and I would love to see how Death Battle handles it. Other than that, this does feel a little bit like Strange vs. Fate 3, where you have two cosmic, magical Marvel and DC characters that are basically impossible to quantify in a competition where the animation will use a minuscule amount of their powers due to budget and time constraints. It will microcosmic at the end probably, and just generally be good without breaking any new bounds because their powers are so over the top that they can never be visually represented in a way that doesn't massively downplay the scale of what they can do, or reach a point where there's so little context to what's happening that there's basically no meaning to it anymore. And to my knowledge, they don't play with the panels the way Zatanna does, that made that animation have some interesting flair to it. Now, I do like Raven simply because purple hair, and I don't hate Phoenix because red hair, but I'm not interested for the fight that much. It's the analysis I'm hoping is good. Also, would love to see that good old comic book panel editing we know and love that brings it to life from Death Battle in this. I think it would look beautiful with the Phoenix especially. Hell, the editing in this episode was pretty good with that stuff too, for what little comic stuff we actually got to see in it, which I'm not complaining at a minimal amount of comic in an episode where neither character is from a comic. But yeah, I'm not quite what you would say falling asleep over the next time, but I'm not particularly interested in it either. Oh wait, I forgot to mention, we got the Ewoks feat, fellas! Ladies and gentlemen, we got it. 10 out of 10 episode. The Cheese Calc wishes it was this based. And after long last, that's the end of that review. I am starving right now, and I gotta eat soon. Well, I don't really eat that much food anymore, I'm on a diet, but I hope you guys enjoyed that review as much as I enjoyed making it and watching this episode. This is a great example of like when I was in the reaction, I clearly enjoyed it, but I don't think I conveyed how much I liked it in that reaction. And never let it be said that when I go in and I like hyperanalyze an episode, that it always makes it worse for me. No, usually my opinions on the first watch basically stay the same. This is a rare case where it did change my opinion on the episode, and it made it better for me. To really home in on those details. Even stuff that I didn't notice, like the text I put on screen with how Nicholas does like a deeper voice closer to his Madara when Obito's at the start, where he's wearing the mask that I'm pretty sure is the one he wore when he was impersonating Madara. Like, that's such a cool touch, and once it breaks, he like drops that voice because he's no longer pretending. That's so cool. Like, especially if you interpret it like when Vader broke his eye, he like lost his composure. Which he did. I mean, that's not even an interpretation, he straight up did, and he just like went, no point in faking anymore. Anyway, if you guys enjoyed the episode, please tell me down below. If you didn't, you will tell me anyway. You can go ahead and give your opinion. It's okay not to like the episode, it's okay to really dislike the episode, as long as you're respectful to other people's opinions and not being a massive chode about it. That's really all I have to say. I mean, you guys can tell me what you think about the result as well, as long as you are civil about it. So, no one's going to be civil about it. Yeah. Thank you to all my patrons scrolling by right now. You guys are legendary. You really do help out a lot. Especially because YouTube is not pushing my videos as much as they were months ago, which is just very lovely. Thank you, YouTube algorithm. Please, everyone, if you could help share this video around, like and comment, that would be a great help. I hate asking for that stuff though. Like, it puts a bad taste in my mouth. But these patrons really do help me out. So now is the part where I read out what people want me to say in the Patreon only Discord, which you can access if you go to my Patreon right now for only $1 a month. And the first one I got that I brought up is a long one, so you're gonna have to enjoy this.
Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? I thought not. It's not a story the Jedi would tell you. It's a Sith legend. Darth Plagueis was a Dark Lord of the Sith, So powerful and so wise, he could use the Force to influence the midichlorians to create life. He had such a knowledge of the dark side that he could even keep the ones he cared about from dying. The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. He became so powerful, the only thing he was afraid of was losing his power, which eventually, of course, he did. Unfortunately, he taught his apprentice everything he knew, then his apprentice killed him in his sleep. Ironic, he could save others from death, but not himself.
I didn't do that in like the exact like inflection as the scene, because I haven't seen that scene in a long time, and I thought it'd be funnier if I just did it not like the scene at all. I just did it in like a generic Palpatine way. Like, this is not like a specific scene, this is something he does all the time, which I think is much funnier.
Yo, dudes, the Ewok cartoon is pretty chill. Maybe you should like power scale it or something. For the last time, Master, I will not give my opponent testicular torsion to win. That's ridiculous and stupid. Why would anyone think the Force should be used for that?
Don't kink shame me!
What? Scary facts. There was no Minecraft in 2002. You can't rhyme against the dark side of the Force. Why even bother? So many dudes being with your mom, who even knows if I'm your father? You're a pissed off little prick with a Napoleon dick. You call that a mustache. I call that dirty Sanchez on your lip. You bitch! Let me remind you who you're messing with. Everything that you did, I'm the motherfucker who invented it. I'm the original Dark Lord.
What?
Shut up, Master. You're like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. My stormtroopers make yours look like someone took a piece of shit and cloned it.
Oh yeah? If Vader is so smart, why didn't he give Obito testicular torsion? Ew! What's wrong with you, Wiz? I thought you were the one with the Force. Obi-Wan and Obi-2 just didn't stack up to Obi-3.
Sire, bring me the finest grilled cheese in the galaxy. Personally, I am a big fan of Rambo First Blood. I highly respect the artistic license of the film and the way in which it portrays its message. A+ experience, highly recommended. Also, Sylvester Stallone is dreamy. But Obito, you're my Padme now. I sliced up those kids like it was Fruit Ninja.
Do you think I fucking know anything, like, power scaling wise from the Star Wars? I watched the holiday special, like, once or twice ever. You think I'm, like, I know versus sense when I was watching that. I know. I didn't even know. I think there's... Oh. I'm just gonna put this one on screen and just let you imagine how it sounds when I say it.
That's no moon. That's wait, what the fuck is that?
Okay, well that was that. I hope you guys enjoyed basically nothing but me saying shit in a half-okay Darth Vader impression. It's really funny that nobody went with anything with Obito. Like, I would have expected at least, can anybody even touch Obito Uchiha? Because, you know, he pretended to be Madara. But, no. Alright, well, yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good one, everybody. Yeah, bye.
Oh, dudes, the Empire's pretty chill. Maybe you could, like, join it or something.
I won't disappoint.